A bike and a miracle. Saving the kitten in the middle of the highway, it was a Saturday morning like any other. The sky was painted with soft hues of blue and gold, and the early sunlight was beginning to warm up the streets. I had woken up early with the intention of taking my usual weekend bike ride, a chance to clear my head and enjoy the quiet, open road before the city truly awoke. The air was crisp, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of dew-soaked grass. It was the perfect day for a long ride. I pulled on my biking gear, laced up my shoes, and grabbed my helmet before heading out the door. My fiancé was still asleep, tucked under the covers, and I decided to let him rest. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I slipped out into the cool morning, my bike leaning against the porch, its frame gleaming under the morning sun. There was something calming about the early hours. The streets were mostly empty, and the hum of the city felt distant. I mounted my bike and started pedaling down the street, the wheels spinning effortlessly beneath me as I gained momentum. The wind rushed past my face, and I felt the familiar exhilaration that came with cycling. It was as if the whole world fell away, and all that remained was the open road and the rhythm of my pedaling. I headed toward the outskirts of the city, where the roads opened up into wide stretches of highway surrounded by fields and distant hills. It was a route I often took, one that allowed me to push myself harder without the usual distractions of traffic and pedestrians. The sound of my tires against the pavement was soothing, and for a while, I lost myself in the ride. But then, as I approached a long stretch of highway, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a piece of debris, perhaps a discarded bag or some litter that had blown onto the road. But as I drew closer, I realized it was something else entirely. Something small, something alive. It was a kitten. My heart lurched in my chest as I quickly swerved to the side of the road, coming to a sudden stop. The kitten was sitting in the middle of the highway, its tiny body huddled close to the ground, trembling with fear. Cars and trucks zoomed past, oblivious to the small creature stranded in the center of the road. I could see the terror in the kitten's eyes as it watched the vehicles whiz by, each one narrowly missing it by inches. I didn't think, I just acted. I dropped my bike to the side of the road and sprinted toward the kitten, my heart pounding in my chest. Every second felt like an eternity as I dodged between the passing cars, my only focus on reaching the tiny, helpless creature before it was too late. The fear gripped me like a vice. The thought of the kitten being struck by a car, sending waves of panic through my body. As I approached, the kitten's wide, frightened eyes locked onto mine. It was barely more than a handful of fur, its tiny body shaking uncontrollably. I could see how thin it was, its ribs visible beneath its soft, dirty fur. Its small, high-pitched mews were almost drowned out by the roar of the traffic, but I could hear the desperation in its cries. "Hold on, little one," I whispered, reaching out my hand slowly, trying not to scare it further. "I've got you." The kitten flinched at my approach, its small body tensing as if preparing to flee. But it was too scared, too weak to move. It stayed frozen in place, its tiny paws gripping the pavement as if it could somehow anchor itself against the chaos surrounding it. Carefully, I scooped the kitten into my arms, cradling it close to my chest. It was so light, so fragile, and I could feel its rapid heartbeat against my skin. It didn't struggle. It was too exhausted, too terrified to do anything but cling to me with tiny, trembling paws. I dashed back to the side of the road, my heart still racing as I held the kitten close. I could hardly believe what had just happened. How close it had come to being hit. How lucky it was that I had spotted it in time. My mind was reeling from the shock, but I knew that the danger wasn't over yet. The kitten was still trembling with fear, and I could feel how cold it was, its tiny body shivering uncontrollably. Gently, I wrapped the kitten in my jacket, trying to offer it some warmth. I could see how malnourished it was, its tiny ribs protruding beneath its fur. It must have been out there for hours, maybe even days, lost and alone on the highway with no one to help it. The thought of it wandering onto the road, confused and scared, broke my heart. As I stood there, holding the kitten close, a wave of emotions washed over me. relief that I had found it in time, fear for what could have happened, and an overwhelming sadness for the little creature that had been so cruelly abandoned. It was clear that the kitten had been left to fend for itself, discarded like a piece of trash. And yet, despite everything, it had survived. Somehow, it had found the strength to keep going, to hold on just a little longer in the hopes that someone, anyone, would come to save it. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked down at the kitten's tiny face, its wide eyes staring up at me with a mixture of fear and trust. It was so small, so helpless, and I couldn't help but wonder how anyone could leave such a fragile creature to die. "I've got you now," I whispered softly, stroking the kitten's head with my fingers. "You're safe." I knew I couldn't leave the kitten out here, not after everything it had been through. I made the decision to take it home with me, to give it a chance at a better life. There was no question in my mind. This kitten had come into my life for a reason, and I wasn't going to abandon it like everyone else had. I carefully placed the kitten in the basket attached to the front of my bike, making sure it was secure and protected from the wind. It curled up into a tiny ball, its eyes half closed as it snuggled into the warmth of my jacket. I could see how exhausted it was, how much it had been through, but there was a quiet resilience in its gaze, a strength that had carried it through the darkest of times. As I rode back home, I couldn't stop thinking about the kitten's journey, how it had ended up on that highway, stranded and alone, with no one to care for it. It must have been terrifying, watching the cars and trucks speed past, each one a blur of noise and danger. And yet somehow, it had held on. It had waited for someone to come, someone to save it. When I finally arrived home, my fiancé was waiting for me at the door, a look of concern on his face. He had woken up to find me gone, my bike missing, and had been worried something had happened. But when he saw the kitten in my arms, his expression softened, and he rushed over to help. "What happened?" he asked, his voice full of concern as he gently took the kitten from me. "Where did you find her?" I quickly explained the situation, how I had found the kitten stranded in the middle of the highway, how close it had come to being hit by a car. My fiancé listened intently, his eyes widening with shock and disbelief. He cradled the kitten close, his face full of empathy as he stroked its soft fur. "She's lucky you found her," he said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "I can't believe she survived out there." We quickly set up a warm bed for the kitten in our living room, wrapping her in soft blankets and placing her near a space heater to help her warm up. We offered her small bits of food and water, careful not to overwhelm her after everything she had been through. She was still weak, her tiny body trembling from exhaustion and fear, but slowly she began to relax. Over the next few days, we took care of the kitten with all the love and attention we could give her. We named her Hope, a fitting name for the little survivor who had held on against all odds. She slowly regained her strength, her once frail body filling out with the nourishment and care we provided. Her eyes, once wide with fear, softened with trust and affection as she began to understand that she was safe now, that she had found her home. Hope's presence in our lives was nothing short of a miracle. She had been so close to death, so close to being lost forever, and yet, somehow, she had found her way to us. And in saving her, we had found something too, a reminder of the power of hope, of never giving up, even in the face of the darkest of circumstances. Every day, as I watched Hope grow stronger and more confident, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. She had come into our lives unexpectedly, in the most unlikely of places, but she had brought with her a sense of purpose, of meaning. She had reminded us of the importance of kindness, of compassion, of never turning our backs on those in need. Hope had been abandoned, left to die on the side of the road, but she had survived. And now, she was a part of our family, a small but powerful reminder that even in the darkest of moments, there is always a chance for light to break through. As I sat on the couch one evening, with Hope nestled comfortably in my lap, her soft purring a steady rhythm against my chest, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that fateful day on the highway. In just a short time, she had become such an integral part of our lives, filling our home with a sense of joy and warmth that we hadn't even realized was missing. My fiancé sat beside me, stroking Hope's fur as we talked quietly about the strange twists of fate that had brought her into our lives. We couldn't stop marveling at how close she had come to being just another tragic story, another life lost too soon. But she had been saved. She had found her way into our hearts, and in doing so, had reminded us of something so simple and yet so profound. Even the smallest life, the smallest act of kindness, can make a world of difference. Do you remember how scared she was when we first brought her home? My fiancé asked, his voice soft as he glanced down at Hope, who was now peacefully dozing in my lap. I nodded, the memory still vivid in my mind. She was trembling so much. I don't think I've ever seen an animal so afraid, I said quietly. But look at her now. She's safe. She knows she's loved. Hope stirred slightly in her sleep, her tiny paws twitching as if she were chasing something in a dream. I smiled down at her, gently scratching behind her ears, feeling a deep sense of contentment settle over me. It was amazing how much love such a small creature could bring into our lives. Over the weeks that followed, Hope's transformation became even more remarkable. Her once fragile frame grew stronger, her fur becoming thick and glossy with good food and care. She began to explore our home with curiosity and confidence, her once timid steps now bold and sure. It was as if she knew she had been given a second chance, and she was determined to live every moment to the fullest. But despite her newfound strength and independence, Hope remained deeply attached to us. She followed us from room to room, always seeking out our company, always wanting to be near. It was clear that she had formed a special bond with us, a bond forged in the moment of her rescue, when we had become her lifeline in a world that had abandoned her. One night, as we sat together in the living room, Hope curled up between us on the couch. My fiancé turned to me with a thoughtful expression on his face. You know, he began slowly, I can't help but think that we didn't just save Hope that day. She saved us too. I looked at him curious. What do you mean? He smiled softly, his eyes full of affection. I mean, she reminded us of what's important, of how fragile life can be, and how even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Before we found her, I think we were so caught up in our own lives, our own problems. But when we saw her there, stranded and alone, everything else faded away. We realized that we had the power to make a difference, to save a life. And that's something I don't think we'll ever forget. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat as his words sank in. He was right. Hope had brought us back to the simple, profound truth that every life matters, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. And in saving her, we had rediscovered a sense of purpose, a sense of connection to something larger than ourselves. As the weeks turned into months, Hope continued to thrive. She became a playful, mischievous presence in our home, always finding new ways to make us laugh with her antics. She would chase after her toys with boundless energy, pouncing on them with delight, or curl up in the warm patches of sunlight that streamed through the windows, her eyes half closed in contentment. But there were still moments when I would catch her staring out the window, her eyes distant, as if remembering the days when she had been alone, stranded in the middle of that highway. In those moments, I would reach out to her, stroking her fur gently, and she would lean into my touch, her trust in us unshakable. One evening, as I sat with Hope in my lap, I thought about all the other animals out there, those who weren't as lucky as she had been. I wondered how many of them were still out there, waiting for someone to save them, waiting for someone to show them that they weren't alone. The thought weighed heavily on my heart, but it also inspired me. If we could make a difference in Hope's life, perhaps we could do more. Perhaps we could help others too. And so, with Hope as our inspiration, my fiancé and I began to volunteer at local animal shelters, offering our time and resources to help care for abandoned and stray animals. We knew we couldn't save them all, but we could do our part. We could offer them hope, just as we had done for the small kitten we had found on the highway. Hope became a symbol of our commitment to making a difference, a living reminder of the power of compassion and kindness. She had been saved by chance, but she had changed our lives in ways we could never have imagined. And in return, we were determined to do what we could to help others like her. those who had been forgotten, abandoned, and left to fend for themselves. Looking back, I realized that finding hope that day on the highway wasn't just a random act of fate. It was a turning point, a moment that had set us on a new path. And as I watched her sleep peacefully in my lap, her tiny body rising and falling with each breath, I knew that we had been given a gift, the chance to make a difference, the chance to save a life. In the end, it wasn't just about rescuing hope. It was about finding hope in ourselves and each other, and in the world around us. It was about realizing that no matter how small or insignificant a life might seem, it is always worth saving. And for that, I would be forever grateful. Hope had come into our lives as a frightened, stranded kitten on the side of a highway, but she had become so much more than that. She had become a part of our family, a part of our hearts, and she had reminded us that even in the darkest moments, there is always a chance for light to break through. Because sometimes, all it takes is a bike, a bit of kindness, and the courage to stop and save a life. And in doing so, we find that we are saved too. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more stories like this.